historically, the Republican Party represented the business class and, let's say, the spirit of getting ahead. The Democrats represented the average guy, the spirit of the fair shake. And that held as sort of the division of the two parties for most of the 20th century. But since the end of the industrial age, the Democrats have become the party of professionals more and more, combined with non-whites and other minority groups. Although those are in play, they're certainly not the property of the Democratic Party. And to the shock of a lot of Democrats, Latino voters moved over toward Trump in 2020 after 4 years of his presidency. And it's worth trying to understand why that happened, rather than assuming that the Democrats are the party of inclusion and the Republicans are the party of white males, as some Democrats think. So, and the Republican Party has gone from being that party of business, of in some ways middle American business, small town business, as well as corporate America, to the party of essentially an angry white working class that has fallen further behind and has seen its place as sort of the backbone of the country, you know, the bedrock of American democracy and capitalism. Instead, their lives look more and more like the lives of people in the cities who suffer from drug addiction, fatherless families, multi-generational poverty. You see that in all kinds of towns and rural areas outside the big metropolitan centers. So the Democrats have the big cities, which have become more and more prosperous and better educated. And the Republicans have the towns and countryside, which have in many areas been sort of abandoned. And so that's where populism of the Trump variety has come from.
It also damages, doesn't it, the kind of constitutional setup that America is, because you have this superabundance of power or imbalance of power in the way America was set up in order that rural parts of America would have a proper say, which sort of worked, didn't it, when it was Republicans and Democrats who were competing for power in those rural areas. But now if you have that ossification on party lines that you're talking about, it makes it really does strike at the kind of fundamentals of the Constitution. I'm thinking of, how the Senate is set up with two senators from even tinier states, et cetera, et cetera. All those things somehow are in play, aren't they?
They are. I mean, our system is founded on a series of compromises, essentially which were about slavery and allowing slavery to continue after the formation of the Republic. And that system empowers small states. It empowers rural areas. It creates an electoral college, which is fundamentally undemocratic because you can win the popular majority and still lose the election, as we see over and over again.
Yes, famously recently.
Famously. And it could be our future, too. But when I was young, there was a Democratic senator from South Dakota. His name was George McGovern. He was the most liberal member of the Senate. Yeah. There were Democrats from Iowa.
I'd forgotten that he came from South Dakota.
Yes,
that is an extraordinary fact.
There was a Democrat from Idaho named Frank Church, very liberal. And these were also really great senators. So the red-blue divide, which really became entrenched starting around the year 2000, has favored Republicans because the anti-democratic structure of our government with the Senate, the Electoral College, and other things too, gerrymandering of political districts, has played into the Republican hands so that they can hold on to power with a minority vote. And that's become the cause of a lot of bitterness among Democrats who want to change the institutions. I don't think they are going to be changed. And also to the public who sense that their vote actually doesn't matter. So if there's an electoral college that's going to overrule the majority, why should I vote? But I wanted to say, Justin, the other thing that's gone wrong is simply our ability to govern ourselves, to solve problems together. And I think that's related to inequality in the sense that, although I don't want to romanticize the past in any way because it gave us slavery, segregation, and all kinds of wrongs, the elites at least felt some obligation to deal with each other in the interest of the public, maybe their own public, but in the interest of the public. And now, more and more, our leaders seem to have no sense that they have an obligation to solve problems. Instead, they are rewarded by the voters not for solving problems, but for pandering, for parading on Twitter and on cable news, for making a name and a brand for themselves. They're more in it for themselves than to represent the public. And it's not only true of the elites. Ordinary Americans simply can't have these conversations that are essential to solving problems. You don't govern a democracy by pure force of numbers. You also have to bring people along, or else eventually you're going to run into a backlash. And today, we no longer know how to do that. Instead, each side sees the other as a mortal adversary that has to be destroyed. And Trump brought us a long way toward that by behaving that way, by being the first president to make no pretense of governing the entire country and representing all Americans.
Well, I've got an easy solution to that. Just get off social media. Everyone.
Amen. I'm not on it, Justin, but
Are you not?
I'm not. I avoided it all my career, and I've paid a bit of a price because I'm sort of a non-entity as far as social media goes. But it is poison. It corrodes the veins of our discourse. It seems to privilege contempt. Contempt is the language of social media, and contempt to me is antithetical to democracy, in which, for me, democracy means you have to have a minimal respect for your fellow citizens in order for this to work. Otherwise, you're going to end up where we are, which is unable to solve problems from COVID to global warming to inequality, et cetera.
So among the many problems that need to be faced up to, is that one of them? And of course there is. I mean, actually, to an extent, a bipartisan effort, isn't there, to look particularly at Facebook, but also at other social media places as well, and say we've got to do something about this. And actually, to an extent, I suppose it's worldwide. I think, was it David Rhodes who said Facebook was the biggest threat to freedom and democracy around the world? David Rhodes, who used to work for Barack Obama. Anyway, there is this kind of sense, isn't there, that something needs to be done. So when we started with renewal and the things that need to be done, is that also one of the things that needs to happen? I'm not sure we're going to get to what the solution might be, but actually a thoroughgoing conversation about who's in charge when it comes to social media.
I think so. I mean, of course, like everything else, the debate over social media quickly devolves into you're for hatred, you're for censorship. When you put it that way, there's no debate to be had. You can't debate someone who's for hatred. You can't debate someone who wants to censor you. And unfortunately, that is the default of our discourse, to go to those extremes. But I think this is an issue where Democrats and Republicans might find some common ground, because there is an antipathy toward big tech on both sides. But there's also so much money coming from big tech, and that's another deep problem in our inability to govern ourselves, is the absolute rule of big money in Washington, that I don't know if they'll ever get it done. But there's some obvious regulations that could be looked at. Have the algorithms made public. Have the algorithms be unable to target advertising in certain ways. Just in basic things that could be done that don't suppress speech, but that force the tech corporations to stop poisoning the well in a way that makes us hate each other quite so much. We'll still hate each other, but it doesn't have to be so bad that it's easy enough for Putin to put a few drops more into the well for everything to go bad, which is what's happened.